Hello, this is the video for Wednesday, December 2nd, 2020, for European history. Where we were last time was exploring the Middle Passage. To do that, I gave you an overview of it myself, and then I showed you a variety of scenes from Roots. First, do you have any questions, comments, or thoughts about that? Well, you're Americans. You're supposed to be unable to stop talking about race in one way or another. So, what stands out as notably beastly? This is probably the easiest question I'll ever ask you about what you saw regarding the Middle Passage and chattel slavery in general. And I'm just going to pick people if we don't get volunteers. Jack?
They got chained up on the boat without food or water.
Well, they eventually got food and water. But you're right, the food and water was lousy and it was tardy. And it was designed to keep them both healthy and weak. Healthy because they've got to bring the cargo across. Weak because you don't want a slave uprising anywhere, especially on a ship like that, if you're running the ship. So yeah, they're chained up. They have no food and water. And they're chained up, do you remember for how long?
Like days. Weeks.
Try it again. It's a 3.
Months.
Months. 3 months is how long it typically took. Now, during those 3 months, they were danced regularly, usually at least every 3 days, maybe more frequently than that, to keep them somewhat in muscle tone. But that's a long time. That's 90 days plus. And that's, including storms, things like that. That's a long time. So you're chained up for 3 months on a deck, and you get what are called benchmarks, and those are areas where the skin has literally broken down, and you can see through to the bone. You had something. Was it different?
When they're making inaudible noises that are like easily overcome. They're grunting and stuff.
Okay. Remind me of what you're talking about, because...
So like when they're in chains and they're like looking at the people and trying to like fight them.
Oh yeah. You know what they're saying? I'm going to kill you.
Oh.
Given every opportunity. Way tube is the language of the Mantinka, as recorded by Alex Haley, for kill white guy. Kill white, way tube. No, and that's what they were all saying. They were all saying, sleep lightly, is what the captain said. So, yeah, there was defiance from some of them. There was hopelessness from others. What else was particularly nasty? Yes.
The fact that they were hunted, like they were wild animals.
The Deadliest Game is the short story that is typically told about hunting human beings. But hunting human beings is nothing new, and it's not just for the insanely eccentric wealthy. These people were hunted. Now, were all slaves hunted like that? No. First of all, most slaves were born into slavery. If you look at the proportion of American slaves after the first few generations of people brought in, by far the larger number of slaves were born into it. That's all they've known. The Brits closed down the slave trade around 1800, a little after. What?
Is it a good bit before we did?
Oh yeah, no, and the Brits, the British Empire is the greatest force against slavery in human history. They did a great job with that. We've done a pretty good job in the sense that, our bloodiest war. But those that were taken in Africa were largely taken through deceit rather than hunting. The chief would sell his own people or would work with slave hunters to hunt other tribes. So not everyone who was captured in the way Kunta Kinte was. But to have that happen, that's pretty awful. That is pretty darn awful. What's horrible? And Lee, since I'm asking you what's horrible about slavery, it shouldn't be that hard to
Yeah,
think of things.
the fact that they would stay that, like, I don't think they have, like, any way of getting.
Your property. Now, there were slaves who were manumitted, which is a fancy way of saying they were freed, but that was rare. Um, George Washington and Thomas Jefferson gave their slaves freedom on their deathbeds. So they were all freed, but they were freed after the former presidents had, you know, had passed, and the families knew that would happen, and there were other arrangements made. No, it wasn't like indentured servitude. Indentured servitude was a way of paying off your debts, or if you go to prison for certain crimes. What you can do at that time is be shipped off to the wilderness, which is dangerous, where you may die, where you're going to work like a dog, but where after 7 years or a dozen years or however long your term is, you're going to be free. So there's something to look forward to. There's something to hope for. With the slaves, it wasn't even that they didn't have a path for themselves to be free. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren were all going to be slaves unless a miracle happened. And they got an owner that was willing to let them work towards freedom. Or what they usually would do is buy their own freedom. Slaves could, under certain circumstances, get a hold of money. And if they saved that money and kept that money, they might hope to earn enough money to buy their own freedom. Now, what they're doing is they're paying the master to set them free. They're buying themselves, and what the master is going to use that money for is to buy another slave to replace them. Or the master will keep them as a free person, but that's rare. Usually a freed slave has to leave and go make their way in the world. And the thing about slavery is, if that's all you've known, it's not easy to get a job. If you are a field hand, that's all you know, and there are plenty of slave field hands. Why would somebody pay for a free one when they could buy a slave much cheaper and get the same work? But yeah, there's a hopelessness about it.
Yeah, it's bad.
What?
What I think is bad.
Yes.
Let's see.
What's bad about slavery that hasn't been mentioned?
Yeah. Well, we've already got that they're no longer free people, they're property. We've already got that being on a ship is horrible, and 3 months is a long time to be upside down or on your back.
Yeah, but 3 months is nothing compared to a lifetime of slavery. So what's horrible about slavery?
I mean, I guess you can't do what you want your whole life. It's kind of...
You have no will.
Yeah.
Think about the women. What particular fate did female slaves have to deal with? This isn't rocket science.
Yeah. I mean...
You're looking for a delicate way to say it.
Yeah.
Just say it.
Rape?
Yeah. What we would call rape.
Yeah.
But it's not rape. Because
they're property.
They're property. So, you don't own your own body. You don't own your own will. If your master wants to sleep with you at any age, he will. Male or female, he will. Or if the master's wife wants to take somebody, she will. You have no choice. If you don't please them, they'll punish you. And punishment does break people. There are wonderful stories about people holding up under torture. Sooner or later, everyone breaks. Sooner or later, everyone talks. Or they die. And so you could be violated. You could be violated nightly. You could be violated and have dozens of bastard children, half-breeds, who are neither free nor slave. They may be born as slaves. They may be the master's illegitimate sons, but they'll still be slaves because they come out of a slave female. You have no self, no dignity. Now, This was horrible about chattel slavery in the South. It was horrible about Roman slavery. It was horrible about Greek slavery. It was horrible about the slavery of one African to another, one Indian to another, one Asian Indian to another. In Asia, that's horrible about slavery. It's horrible about the sex slaves today, the black slaves in Arabia today, and those people who were enslaved by communist police states like in China, North Korea, and so forth. Slavery is awful. So, I do expect you to rise to the occasion of this question, people who are at the Charter Academy. If slavery is awful, and we agree to that, and slavery is ubiquitous of pre-industrial civilizations, which I'm telling you is the case, all pre-industrial civilizations have slavery. They may call it serfdom, they may call it the peasantry, even if they have peasants and serfs, they're still going to have slaves. Slavery is everywhere. So slavery is awful. Slavery is among every pre-industrial civilization. If those two things are the case, why are Americans particularly vulnerable to feeling guilty about a few hundred years of slavery? Why is it that we look upon ourselves so badly? Why is it that for the United States of America, race is the Achilles heel? Despite the abolitionist movement, despite the dozens of whites and hundreds of blacks, or larger numbers actually, that were killed during the Underground Railroad, despite fighting the American Civil War. Again, I say our bloodiest war as if it's just a quick thing. It's our bloodiest war. The American Civil War killed more Americans than World War II. Far more than Korea, Vietnam, or the War on Terror. After the Civil War, we have the Radical Reconstruction, where radical Republicans go south and black congressmen appear in southern states during the time that the Union military occupied the South. But 10 years after the Civil War, the Union militaries were withdrawn, and Jim Crow laws were set up. So then, for another 80, 90 years, the South had blacks as second-class citizens. And if they got uppity, the order of the Ku Klux Klan was there to keep them in line through terror. And then there's the civil rights movements of the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, which produced the Civil Rights Act of 64, turned into law, making racial discrimination illegal from 1 year before I was born. And yet today, American cities erupt in flames when black men are killed by police. Today, the Black Lives Movement claims that we are nothing but racism, that racism defines us more than anything else, and that we are guilty of a systemic racism that is inescapable, which I personally deny. Since racial discrimination hasn't been legal since the year before I was born, I sort of see a problem with people blaming institutional racism for their lives. I went to a majority ghetto black and Puerto Rican school when I was a kid. I saw the way those kids came to school. They were not ready to learn. They were wild. And the way the schools were run, they were allowed to run wild within the schools. They learned very little. And yet they were expected to compete after graduation. They were fit for very little. I have relatives who've been on welfare for 3 and 4 generations. Generations of people in the United States. Why do those welfare programs exist? Why does affirmative action exist? Preferential treatment for people who are formerly discriminated against. Preferential treatment that's been around for most of my lifetime, since the early 1970s. If there's this, there's institutional racism against whites in hiring. because of affirmative action, in getting accepted to college because of affirmative action. Affirmative action is legalized discrimination in favor of formerly oppressed minorities. Why is it that we are so prone to horror and guilt over race in this country? You're now going to write for the next 3 minutes on that topic to be turned in. So write it on a separate sheet of paper, put your name on it. You at home, prepare an email to this effect and email me. Why? With all that I just said, why is it that race is so powerful in our society? 3 minutes. "90 seconds. "45 seconds. Those of you at home should email me now as you are finished typing, and then we'll come back to the lesson. We'll see how many people email me in a timely fashion. 10 seconds. Okay. Whoever I roll is going to read what they have. You can embellish it. You got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people, so each of you is worth 4. 1 to 4, 5 through 8, and so forth. 19. That's you.
Almost a crit.
Yeah. Just read.
Yeah. Just last sentence is not finished.
That's fine.
Race is powerful in our society because of our country's history with it. So I'd say in general, people feel shame for past events like slavery.
Okay, but you said nothing with respect, Sam. You said nothing about the particular unique reasons why Americans, rather than people in other parts of the world, feel guilty over it.
Yeah.
Do tear it out, turn it in, and if you want to finish the sentence if you do that. Each of you is now worth 5. 1 to 5, 6 through 10, 11 through 15, 16 through 20. 10.
Americans are extremely influenced by the media. This is obvious and not at all controversial. Many media platforms, in fact most of them, focus on terrible events happening rather than the good ones, because this gets them viewers. When they see a black person being supposedly discriminated against, they make it a major news story that many Americans believe.
Okay. So you're saying that the media in our country, which is quite influential, for better or worse it is, distorts the news for sensational reasons to get ratings. And one of those sensations is to stoke racial division when there is a crime involving that may not directly involve race, but that may incidentally involve race. In other words, you've got a person engaged in assault, they are shot dead, but the person who was shot dead, who was assaulting, happened to be black. The person who shot them happened to be a police officer, black or white, because riots have happened when black police have had to defend themselves or use lethal force against blacks. Okay, well, our media involvement is a factor. Thank you. Please make sure you turn it in. 1 to 6, 7 through 12, 13 through 18. 20. Lee.
Okay, so the topic of race is a powerful driving force in American society today because of it's a bit more recent than other things. Britain got rid of racism a long time ago, way before we did, right? And Martin Luther King, that was around the 60s, I think, right? Okay, meaning that it's technically possible that if you have someone who was 10 years old back then, who's treated pretty terribly, and they could still be alive today.
Okay. I don't know how much that you read and how much of that you improvised. You're saying that the recentness of racism is what caused it. First of all, Britain, like every other country with human beings in it, has racism. They got rid of slavery around in the early 1800s. But there are still people who are arguably quite racist, who are black against white, who are white against black, who are black against Asian, who are Asians against blacks, who are Asians against whites, all different kinds. The thing about racism, it's a universal thing. We are tribal creatures. We're programmed for that. We're programmed to like people who are similar to us and dislike people who are different. One of the things that's amazing about modern culture, especially in the United States, is how hard we try to overcome that programming. The same as in Britain. Recentness, maybe. It's an argument. I appreciate it. Make sure you turn it in. Of those two people who are left, do either of you wish to speak? I'll take a volunteer. Okay.
The reason that race is such a massive issue, and particularly here in America, is because it's the most immoral thing we've done from the perspective of today's culture. And when people want to find things they don't like about America, there's not much else to point to slavery.
Okay. You're saying that it's the worst of our sins as a nation, and that if people want to criticize us as a nation, they're going to go to the worst of our sins. That makes a lot of sense. To me, that is the closest argument yet to what I think is the truth about it. Go on.
Can I also add something?
Yes, please.
So, because of the demographics we have in America, there's a lot more different cultures, and they have a bigger voice because there's more of them in America, especially.
We're a country of immigrants. And since the 1960s, immigration policy has favored third world countries over European countries. So the majority of immigrants that have come through since I was born was not from Europe, was not from areas of the world that had been Western, but was from areas of the world that had different cultures, different races, and so forth. And the expectation, of course, is that they assimilate to American norms. To an extent, that happens. But yeah, we have a large population that is quite diverse and has been more diverse than most countries, at least up to the very recent years. I think that there are people in the American Indian community would argue that the conquest of their continent and the genocide of their people is a worse sin than slavery. But that's like saying that I have it worse because the guy came in and trapped my family and kept them in a burning house until they all died, as opposed to when we were out shopping and there was a mass shooting and my family was all killed. They're both horrible events. To say which is worse really it doesn't matter. By that point, you're dealing with some pretty dark stuff. In both cases, in regards to African chattel slavery and American Indian conquest, there are unresolved problems. And they are our biggest sins because of this. Because they completely violate our self-image. We define ourselves as liberty-loving, freedom people. liberty-loving, freedom people don't willfully destroy another nation of people to take everything that they have and put them on reservations. We did that. We, our ancestors. They don't take blankets from cholera and smallpox wards from hospitals in the East and ship them west and give them away free to the Indians, who have no resistance to those horrible diseases. That was germ warfare perpetrated by the Jackson administration. That is among the worst things that we've ever done. So yes, it violates our self-image. Do you have anything to add?
Well, race and gender is like the two biggest problems, I guess, in America. And people in America are kind of competitive, so there's always a top dog, a more superior person. And race and gender is the easiest way to group people, and so possibly with the media inflating problems, it just seems that like white people are bad, worse, lesser because of these discriminations that were more in the past, instead of just individuals.
So you're saying that as a group, Caucasians are targeted because as a group, people like them in the past did things that today don't fly.
In a way, yeah.
What am I not getting? Because I don't think I got all of that.
So just basically, like, it's kind of like saying that since a white cop shot someone, that all white people hate all black people.
Yeah. Look, there are people who actually teach in college campuses that the only kind of racists in the world are white. They actually teach that there is no such thing as a racist who is not white or a sexist who is not a man, which is insane. Believe me, I've lived in majority minority areas. I am not myself white in terms of my bloodlines. Racists come in all colors, all shapes, all sexes, all sizes, all religions. Human beings are not universally anything. The whole lie of racism is that your race determines your destiny. We're not dogs. You know a German Shepherd. You know a Chihuahua. You know a Lap Poodle. And you know these three dogs, what they're capable of by looking at them. You go, oh, German Shepherd, oh, Lap Poodle, oh, Chihuahua. And you know what you're going to get. Why? Because their instinctive programming tells them to do certain things. They have certain tendencies that are very, 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 very hard to resist. We are sentient creatures. We are self-aware. And the notion that because we happen to have a certain amount of melanin in our skin, or our hair is a certain way, or we have certain genitals either inside or outside of our bodies, that that's going to determine how we think, no, that's nonsense. There is a blend of some pretty powerful mojo in human society. Race, religion, and culture. Race can affect. If that's what you think about, if you are brought up in if the Nazis bring you up, you're going to think in racial terms. Religion. You may be brought up in a religion that thinks that anyone who isn't one of us is damned to hell. And therefore you shouldn't treat them well because they're damned to hell. You shouldn't involve yourself with them, fall in love with them, like them. And this comes in all sorts of religions. It's not unique to any one religion. Religious hatred and race hatred both exist. But where they meet is culture. Culture determines how people act. It is the core beliefs that bind people together, right? Up until after World War II, the cultures and race and religion of European nations were relatively homogeneous. Relatively. I mean, there were religious divisions, the French Huguenots, for example, but and those were played out by ultimately exiling the Huguenot. But in general terms, France was Catholic, England was Anglican, Germany was split, South Germany Catholic, North Germany Lutheran. But they're all Germans, pretty much in Germany, except for a few Slavs in the east, and a few Italians in the south, and a few Frenchmen in the west, and Dutchmen and Belgians and Luxembourgers.
Tasty.
There's a name for a restaurant. I love that. It isn't until after World War II that these racial unities that were European nations begin to change, where they begin to invite people in from the Middle East as guest workers. We're an immigrant nation. We are expecting everyone to come here and become Americans. But there are two groups that don't fit that mold: American Indians and blacks who were slaves. And that's because their experience is different from the typical American immigrant experience. They didn't come here voluntarily. The Indians were here already. The blacks were brought here involuntarily. And for a century after the Civil War, blacks in the South were treated as second-class citizens in their own homes by the Jim Crow system from the mid 1870s until the mid 1960s. So 90 years of that. Those things do play a role. But ultimately, what America is supposed to be about is individual freedom, which is what we're going to be talking about in a moment. And that individual freedom is so violated by what happened with slavery. Our slavery was not unique. I've been saying this again and again because you need to understand it. Because the way a lot of people in the media portray it, we are uniquely guilty. Baloney. Every pre-industrial society had slaves. Every single one, of one kind or another. What's different about us is that we think that we're good people. We think that we're people that are open to free choice of the individual. We think that we're open to the possibility of somebody being born in rags and rising to riches on their own talent. We have all these things about us, our self-image, and the history of slavery, and to an extent the history of the United States government in relation to the Indian nations. All of that violates that self-image. I think that's one reason why we are so prone to this constant reliving of a past that is long dead. However, I would be lying if I left it there. There are people in this country that benefit from ongoing race hatred and race division. And those people talk all they can about equality and about ending racism. But with everything they do is rooted in race. How many people of this background, that background, the other background are chief executive or officers of Fortune 500 companies? How many people like this are in Congress, in the U.S. Senate? How many people like this have been president? Yes, gender plays a role too. Ultimately, this birth characteristic determinism, which says that you are how you are born, is antithetical to the American ideal of freedom. It's antithetical to the objective reality that we're each living, aware beings capable of choosing our destiny, choosing our beliefs, choosing our actions. And at some point, we're going to have to stop letting ourselves be defined this way. The other question, the flip side, I've spent more time on this than I intended, is America defined by its racism, by its worst history? Or is America defined by its fighting for the freedom of slaves? Is America Jamestown and the slavery plantations of Virginia, or is America Plymouth and the great experiment of building a liberty-oriented, freedom-oriented, religiously free area in Massachusetts? Which is the real America, the Confederate States of America or the United States of America? Is the real America the America that stole the land of the Indians, or that fought to free France and Germany in 2 world wars, that fought against Soviet communism, and that today stands against both international terror and other forms of totalitarian oppression? What defines us, our worst or our best? Or are we a mixture of all? It's important that everyone, here and outside, within the sound of my voice, think about this. Because there are powerful forces in this country that want to tell you, you're nothing but a female. You're nothing but a white guy. You're nothing but whatever it is you are. Well, I'm of mixed race. I don't know if you are or not, but you get the idea. They try to pigeonhole you and put you in a box where they can control you. I suggest that you think for yourself. Anyway, do you have any last thoughts before we move on? Thank you for the discussion, and for those of you at home, I'll look forward to your emails, and if you want to discuss this, we can spend a couple minutes tomorrow. Louis XIV. So one thing I didn't bring over. Louis XIV is somebody who I didn't show you and who I'm going to show you. He is a person who, I'm going to show you online. When you check your video today or tonight or whatever, look at the pictures of Louis. And the reason I'm not showing you them in class is because, gee golly whiz, YouTube. And they'll hit me with some kind of copyright violation for showing images. Yeah, I don't want to deal with them. It's crazy making. Anyway, look at the images of Louis XIV, and you will see a manly man in high heels, wearing full makeup, with lace, with a wig. You will see a manly man who is dressed for peace, with fleur-de-lis ermine robes, and who is dressed for war in his best lace armor. Yes, armor with lace coming out underneath, with a wig, a battle wig, a war wig, and with his beauty mark for peace and for war. Because men were peacocks in Louis XIV's time. If you know anything about nature, peacocks and peahens are sort of blend in. They're sort of camouflage colored. Male peacocks, here I am, all colorful, look at me. Well, men wore as much makeup as women in those days. Men spent as much time on their wigs or hair as women. Both sexes were ornamental, if they were nobles. So, look at that. Now, we are shifting into the Enlightenment philosophy that is what comes up as a reaction against absolutism, and it's going to lead to the Age of Revolution. We start with a guy named Thomas Hobbes. And Hobbes writes Leviathan. Leviathan. And on the cover of Leviathan is this picture, which you may actually get a chance to see. And you'll see what that large, giant image is made up of. What makes up that large, giant image? You see? Okay. See? What makes up that giant image of the king? Leviathan, nation. See what makes it up? Yeah. That's right. Okay, you have it there in your notes. I'm just showing you. Yes, the Leviathan is made of people! Like Soylent Green, but less disgusting. It's a science fiction reference. Hobbes lives through the entire Civil War period. And Hobbes says that the natural state of mankind is a life that is short, mean, and brutal. A life that is short, mean, and brutal. A life that is short, mean, and brutal. That's human life. Mean and brutal. A life that is short, mean, and brutal. The average lifespan for a man or a woman was in the late 20s or early 30s in those days. Probably closer to the mid to late 20s. That means half the people die before they reach 30. Short, mean. We are struggling every moment of every day of our lives to get food into our mouths, warmth around our bodies, to have the basic necessities of life. We struggle. There's not enough of it. We have to fight for it. We have to work for it. And that means, by mean, he doesn't mean mean-spirited, nasty. What he means is mean as in miserly. Mean as in cheap, tightwad, penny pinching. There's no generosity. You walk by a guy, he's starving to death. You walk by him every day he gets a little thinner and more emaciated. But you've got all you can do to feed yourself and your family. You have no time, no money for him. The church will take care of him. And you pay your tithe at church, and that's going to have to cover it. Now, is that the way we want to be as a people? No. But Hobbes says that life is so damn hard, we end up being that way. We as a species live lives that are short and mean and brutal. You got to do what you got to do to survive. That's the law of the streets then. That's the law of the streets now. You got to do what you got to do to survive. If you're in prison and you don't join a gang, you're everyone's target. If you're in prison and you find Big Bubba who will take care of you in a horrific relationship inside your cell, you've got to deal with that. But on the other hand, Big Bubba will protect you from the other scary people in prison. And one of the worst things about prison, aside from the fact that you need the protection of some big hulking brute, is that if you don't join a gang, all the gangs will pick on you. And in prison, picking on you usually leads to suicide. You can't handle what's being done to you. I would much rather have people work in chain gangs. To me, that's a cleaner system. But somehow that's cruel, but what we let people do in prison is not. And the gangs in prison are absolutely racial. There are Hispanic gangs that are Mexican. There are Hispanic gangs that are Caribbean. There are black gangs. There are white supremacist gangs. And you join the gang of your race if you join a gang. It is awful. It is dehumanizing. It is brutalizing. But why do people do those awful things? Because you got to do what you got to do to survive. Short, mean, and brutal. That's us, according to Hobbes. Why? Because Hobbes lives through the horrors of the English Civil War period. All of it. And he sees the worst in people. But there is an answer to that short, mean, and brutal existence that we lead. The Leviathan. Imagine that there are giant organisms like amoebas, super amoebas, stretching across Europe. You've got the Portuguese amoeba, and the Spanish amoeba, and the French amoeba, the Italian amoeba, the German amoeba, the Polish amoeba, the Hungarian amoeba, the Turkish amoeba, the Russian amoeba, the English amoeba. I could go on. It's fun. Amoeba, amoeba, amoeba. And the amoeba is composed of people. All Englishmen make up the Leviathan that is England. All Frenchmen make up the Leviathan that is France. We are literally, according to Hobbes, a body politic. And as such, as a body politic, we each have a role to play, like each cell in our body has a role to play. Some of us are bones. They hold society, structure it, and that maybe is your police and your soldiers. Some of us are in the digestive tract, and those are your peasants and your serfs and your slaves, providing you with food and water. And some of us help us breathe, and they're also the peasants, serfs, and slaves, and maybe they're craftsmen. And some of us protect the outside, and those are the soldiers, and the bones, I guess, are the police. And some of us think and transmit that information, and that's our central nervous system. We each have roles to play. If you're not the king, or an aristocrat, or a leading courtier, your job is not to make decisions. Your job is to grow the food, or repair the roads, or work the wood, or shape the metal. That's your role. Know your role in the Leviathan. So the king's duty is to be the mind of the nation. That's why the king's face is on the Leviathan. The king decides who lives and who dies. The king decides whether to have your arm reach forward and punch someone, even though your fist is going to feel pain. Your hand is going to feel pain. You could break your hand hitting somebody else hard enough. Your brain will decide if you're going to walk over hot coals or if you're going to go under the water and hold your breath until it hurts. And what is the job of the cells that make up the rest of your body? To obey. If the Leviathan doesn't obey its central nervous system and its programming, you end up with cancer. An unpredictable growth of cells that leaches nutrients and oxygen from the rest of the body and ultimately compromises the health of the rest of the body, killing you. That's what unregulated cells in the Leviathan can do. It can cause cancer or other diseases that will kill you. For the Leviathan to be healthy, everyone should do their job. Now, does this sound similar to anything we've looked at so far? Hobbes has taken the Chinese idea of the mandate of heaven and of Confucian philosophy, which says that in our philosophy of social harmony, everyone has a place and their job is to be harmonious in their place. Hobbes is saying the same thing, but in a uniquely Western way. Because life is short, mean, and brutal, the only escape from that brevity of our lives, that scriminess of our lives, that nastiness of our lives, is to be harmonious with the Leviathan. If you take care of the Leviathan will take care of you. Your job is to obey, unless you're the king. Do you see how that works? Hobbes is thinking about these things. But Hobbes is not one of these people whose work naturally leads to freedom, except that other philosophers will come about and argue against a Hobbesian view of life within any nation state as being a part of a giant creature, a giant amoeba-like Leviathan that is France or Germany. You see how harmonious Hobbes' words are with l'état c'est moi, from Louis XIV. I am the state. I am le roi soleil. I am the king, the sun king. I am the bright shining center. All of that is harmonious with Leviathan. So any questions, comments, or thoughts about Leviathan? Okay. Why call this the Enlightenment? Anyone want to hazard a guess? Imagine that ignorance is darkness. This is common imagery. When a society loses track of its knowledge and skills, what happens? What's it called? It's called a certain kind of age. Yeah?
Dark Age.
A dark age. Darkness is synonymous with ignorance. The Enlightenment is designed to shine light into the dark places, to banish the darkness and fill the area with the light of knowledge, of reason, of thought. The Enlightenment is self-consciously Illuminati, the enlightened ones. The Enlightenment is self-consciously about trying to bring a reasoned understanding of existence, of nature, nature's laws, and nature's God. To understand God in a deistic fashion, not in a theological fashion. Deism or deism is the belief in God as a creator without any reference to dogma except what you observe in the world. You understand the nature of God in deism by understanding the laws of nature. Natural philosophers are not only people who think about these things, but physicists used to be called natural philosophers. Scientists and modern science comes from the natural philosophy of the Enlightenment. To understand us, we need to understand human nature, which means we need to understand the broader nature, which means we need to understand natural law. The concept of natural law. Self-evident laws of life in this universe. Not just of gravity, but of life, of human life, human society. So we try to suss out nature's God by sussing out nature's laws, which can help us figure out the laws of human nature, and therefore we can approach existence not from a standpoint of ignorance and darkness, but from a standpoint of being enlightened through our education. So this is a self-conscious movement to bring the light of reason to us, to our society. Not just science, even though the word science means knowledge, but the light of understanding through reason. Reason is the key, and reason is the logical application of your mental faculties. So you may want to have that too. Reason is the logical application of your mental faculties. Reason. So, what are you people at home doing? You are writing me an email about race in your own words and your own thoughts. What are you people here doing? When you get home tomorrow for your lesson, you're looking at today's lesson to look at the pictures that I'll show you of Louis XIV so that you can see him in all his manliness. And we are now looking forward into the Enlightenment, and we are moving towards the American and French revolutions. Any questions? Seeing none? Yes?
I mean, just more of a standard question. Are there, like, more pictures from the time that are similar to, like, Louis XIV's pictures of him in full makeup, but, like, dressed for his kingliness?
Well, that's what I'm going to show you. I'm going to show formal pictures, but you're asking about everyday clothing. Louis XIV had no everyday clothing. He was the king. So he could strip down and go swimming, I suppose. But in general terms, he's going to be wearing the fancy.
I just think that, I mean, also in chapter 18, I think it has his nighttime ritual.
Oh, yeah. Well, there's the wake-up ritual and the nighttime ritual. One was for 14th, one was for Louis XVI. But it's the same thing. It's Versailles. This is Versailles. Thank you, and have a nice day.